Hey, Travis from TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. Today I'm stepping you inside the beat. We are inside a session that I just finished a few days back entitled New Horizons. This is a East Coast instrumental, kind of East Coast hip hop instrumental with sample elements as well as composition and instrumentation. So I'm going to step you through that. I already shot a recreation beat making video for that again a few days ago, and that's linked up on the channel. I'll make sure that that's linked in the description if you haven't seen it. If you're more interested in those type of videos that are just kind of quick to the point, this is going to be a little more in-depth. I don't want it to go on too long. Also, if you are an artist and you're watching this for whatever reason, just keep in mind I've had artists ask me too of tracks that I've put up videos for but haven't actually released the instrumentals, because all the new instrumentals that I'm releasing from here on are actually going to the club members area first. I mean, they will eventually be cycled out to the public catalog. The links to everything and all the videos are always in the description. So all the sample packs, the free downloads, you know, everything is listed and linked there. So if you're ever interested and you don't see it on the public site or on the channel, check out the club membership and you'll see what titles, what instrumentals are available there. So if you haven't heard this track, I'm gonna go ahead and just play. I've got all the tracks enabled just to give you a preview of what this sounds like, and then we'll start trying to break it down. I guess I'm going to start with, I've got my group of drums here, but I'm going to just start with the sample just to give you that part of it. Pretty simple, and this is pretty much on all my tracks. And I know I've said this in past videos if you've watched any of these breakdown videos. It's a filter, it's a high pass filter, sometimes advanced EQ. This is an automation for part of the second verse, I believe. I can look at that really quickly. So this is just a second filter that I have enabled in some automation here, so I kind of take that out of the equation during that second half of the second verse. Picking the quality sounds is the most important thing, and then simple shaping with EQing or filtering if necessary, compression if necessary, reverb, delay, and then from time to time I'll use some other plugins, but I try to keep it as simple as possible. So I'm going to solo this sample sequence. And I'm going to go ahead and just give this sample away because so many people ask me. I don't know the name of the artist, so I'll just give the title. Make Me Twice the Man is what I have listed. This was actually a vinyl rip. For those of you who ask me time and time again about what sample IDs, that is the one for this particular track. Preview a little bit of that. And this was the little turnaround right here that I was drawn to at the beginning. It was several chops. You can see, I'm not sure how many chops are here. Looks about 50 some odd, maybe around 60 chops. A lot of experimentation using a keyboard. When I have a sample that has a lot of chops that I've taken from it, I like to many times work on my keyboard just because I have more that I can work with at a given time. You know, I can spark some different ideas, try some different drum patterns, different tempos and things. I pitched this down, I believe, 2 half steps and have a 38 millisecond attack on all the chops. One other thing I'll mention really briefly when it comes to this sample is there's a section right here, this particular chop, that has the reverse effect. That's something that you can enable the sustain mode in Ableton's sampler instrument. I've shot an actual video on that if you're using Ableton Live, if you're interested in this, and I kind of break down and give you different scenarios of, or give you at least one example of how I incorporate this technique kind of to fill up some extra space if my samples aren't working well together, or I'm just looking for a way to, again, fill up some extra space. So I laid that down with a metronome and then introduced the drums is usually my next step in the equation. I'm either either starting with drums or starting with the sample if it's a sample based beat. This drum kit is actually an old kit. For those of you, if you've followed me from, you know, way back many years ago, I used to release these little mini drum kits. This was for instrumental Not That Easy, looks like. And so I was just releasing mini drum kits as I was releasing new instrumentals. So they would just contain, you know, maybe 7, 8, 10, 12 different drum samples. So this was a kit from probably 2011 or 2010. That's the kick, and then this is the snare. So that with the sample. Pretty simple pattern, nothing too crazy. And so I introduced also a tambourine to hit down on select snares. So that looks like every 4 bars, just to give some variation to the drums. Crashes are grouped here because that's how they were mixed, you know, keeping all the drum elements together. I didn't introduce the crashes until a lot later when I was creating, but the way that those sound, I only have, I think, and this crash was also from that same kit, from that mini drum kit. And I took, I'm not sure if I'm using this crash or not, but I took basically one crash and I pitched them differently. So you can see that this crash is transposed down -4 half steps. This one's -1, and then this one is actually the original pitch. So I'm essentially creating 3 different crashes, or 3 variations of a crash from one. Point is when I introduced the bass. This is just a simple sub bass patch. This is included. This is patch number 1 in the TCustomz bass sample pack. It's one that I use quite often. So depending on what speakers you're listening to this, or headphones. And the way I have this set up is I have a sampler instrument that contains all of the sample notes that are in that pack, and so at any time I can enable one of those. Some of these are more acoustic, some of them are synth based with, you know, sub elements there. I can enable 2 and be able to layer and then change, you know, the velocity or volume on one or the other and kind of blend them together. So this gives me some control. I have this sampler instrument with these notes saved in an instrument rack, and I've also have these scale MIDI effects in live. What this allows me to do is to enable a key. And so specifically if I'm playing a bass line on my drum pad, based on how my drum pad is programmed with a chromatic scale. So I basically have my drum pad control banks, my MPD32, set up as a chromatic scale. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and going on like that. And so once I have those control banks that way, then I can easily enable these scales. And what this does is it's going to take it from that chromatic scale and shift it to all notes within a particular key. I've got a major scale here, I've got a minor scale. You can do a minor harmonic scale if you know you're going to introduce a raised 7th into your bass line. Sometimes it's difficult to play a bass line on a drum pad. This is kind of a way that I've found that makes it a little easier. I mean, I have a keyboard I can play a bass line on, but sometimes I like to switch it up just from a creative perspective. So I'm not going to go into more details on that in this video, but if you want more details on that, if you're an MPD user or, you know, anything, this sounds like something you're interested in, just drop a comment and let me know, and maybe I can shoot a video or go into more details on that. But the bass line's pretty simple, as you saw. Next up, the hats. I'm just using a simple loop. I do have them, I did a little time stretching. You can see they're pretty much off the grid. There's nothing, it's kind of a loose feel to this, so the hats are pretty simple. I also introduced an open hat, or actually a pedal, I believe. So Next up was a drum roll. I think this came a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and introduce it here. I think I started introducing some of the FX chops after I had all these elements in, but nonetheless. So this is a drum roll that I found in one of my packs. I'm not sure which one this came from. As you can see, I did a little time stretching. The drum roll was a little short. I actually needed an additional hit. So what I did is I just copied over this first hit, and that's what makes up this. This was pitched up. I transposed it up a half step just to give the pitch a different sound. So it actually sounds like the same hit isn't hitting twice in a row. It actually has a downward progression in terms of the key. So that was nice to add to that turnaround. Next up was just a percussion rattle to fill in some extra space. Nothing too wild. I did, let's see, I think I did automated panning on it, so it was just wasn't anything crazy. So you can just see that comes down on a pretty regular basis. The transitions came later, but they're pretty straightforward. I mean, I try to introduce some sort of transitions in the majority of my tracks just to keep the track progressing along. Chimes, this came from that pack, like I mentioned before, that simple drum kit came from Not That Easy, was an instrumental that I released a long time ago. So this is a set of chimes that I've used a lot. And there's a transition sound that I've used a lot. I know this was one of the transition sounds that I initially created using, I think Atmosphere was the earlier version of Omnisphere, and I think I had some synth sounds in there that I put filters on and different things. Had actually exported some of those transitions down into audio, so this was one of those sounds. I'm pretty sure this was included in one of the either volume 2, 3, or 4 sample packs. This track is just an intro. It's just basically a fade in of the sample right where that turnaround starts, and that kind of kicks the beat off. So sometimes it's easier for me to work with the intros in audio, so I just freeze that down, and then I can, manipulate it if I need to do any other processing or anything. I think with this I just put a high pass filter, and then I did some automated panning on that intro. So I have a group of 4 effects. These are really simple stabs. I just scan through the same sample multiple times, trigger my controller like I do. I just like to find little accents as the beat's playing through. Once I find something that catches my attention, I'll stop. And all of these are high pass filter with either ping pong delay or just a simple delay. And it's just getting the levels right, and sometimes it's panning, like this one is panned a little bit to the right, just getting them to sit well in the mix, getting the frequencies to work with the other elements in instrumentation.